Welcome to the Humourology podcast with me, Paul Barros. This is where we put the fun into business fundamentals. My guest on this edition is an acclaimed comedian, actor and radio presenter hailing from Manchester. He first captured our attention as young Kenny in the beloved series Phoenix Nights and has since graced our screens in Looking for Eric and Coronation Street. Beyond television, he's a regular at the Edinburgh Fringe, comedy clubs around the world, and his own tours. He hosts the popular podcast About 30 Minutes, no more than 45, and has entertained audiences on shows like Live at the Apollo and QI. Now, like me, he's a Manchester United fan, which means his sense of humour gets tested weekly, sometimes hourly. When he's not making us laugh, he's a devoted parent, dog walker, and undercover vegan. Justin Moorhouse, welcome to the Humourology podcast.
Thank you very much. It's been a long time coming.
It has, but it's been worth the wait. That's all I can
Definitely.
say. You grew up in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is about 6 miles from Manchester city centre, if I'm right.
Yeah, I was born there. Actually, I've got a joke in my new show about that. I do it, getting straight into the anecdotes, but I tell a story about my auntie having the last rites in the hospital, and I sort of sage the audience by going, "It's not sad. She died in this hospital. I don't blame her. In fact, I was born there, so 1-1." You know? And it just tickles me. So I was born in Ashton-under-Lyne, and I grew up in a place called Hyde, which, if anybody knows anything about Hyde, unfortunately has a bit of a bad rep at the moment. Well, recently, Harold Shipman, obviously, and there's a couple of other like notorious things from there. But it's a very much a kind of working class suburb, very much suburban Manchester now. Like a lot of these places have kind of been brought within Greater Manchester. It doesn't have as much of its own identity as it used to have.
Does that mean gentrified? Or does that just mean pulled into... No,
not gentrified.
You said no straight away.
No, not at all. It's a working class town, which, when I was growing up, the big employers were the sausage factory, the cigarette factory, and the wallpaper factory were three huge employers. And people don't use wallpaper anymore. People don't smoke anymore. And it's kind of had a tough time. But I'm really grateful for living there. It's right on the edge of the sort of like the city, on one side you're 15 minutes on the train from the city centre, and then you can look and see these brilliant hills. My dad used to say nestling in the foothills of the Pennines, which makes it sound really nice, but it was a great place to grow up. A lot of freedom, and playing out a lot, and it was that kind of place, and relatively safe, but kind of we weren't dumb. We weren't, we were streetwise, but it wasn't like, it wasn't downtown, Moss Side kind of. It wasn't as harsh as that.
Well, but was humor valued in your family growing up?
Yeah, it's a kind of really interesting that we're talking about this at this stage, because my tour that I'm on is called The Greatest Performance of My Life, and I talk about how I love comedy and I absorb comedy, and my whole life is about comedy. And people often ask you when you do an interview, obviously not as in depth as this, because we'll talk at length about humor, but local newspaper interviews will say, "Oh, were you funny at school?" And I say, "Well, yeah, of course I was, because everybody was." I mean, my favorite comedians in the world, Billy Connolly, Les Dawson. Growing up, I loved Eric Sykes, the young ones. So much comedy. I was so lucky to be the age I am, where I could enjoy all that kind of classic 1970s stuff, and then be sort of just about aware when alternative comedy came in. And I'm so lucky to be born at the time I am. Golden age of comedy at both ends. And nobody has made me laugh as much as your mate will make you laugh in the pub, where one night he'll just go, "I've got to go now." "Why?" And he'll go, "I've shit myself." That's just so matter of fact. And then you're like, "Oh, just change your boxes." And he goes, "No, twice." And then, those stories that we have as friends, I don't think you can ever laugh at a comedian or a film or anything as much as shared experiences with your friends, where you feel like you're going to die from laughing. Your ribs are exploding. And And if I ever get close to that performing, then I'm very, very lucky.
Well, I mean, that is so true, isn't it? Because yeah, you know me and Ainsley from the Calypso Twins and all that, but we grew up, we went to school together.
Hmm.
And so um, all our kids have grown up with us laughing like school kids. You
Yeah,
know, that laughter which can only happen like you're describing it when
yeah,
you've got that shared experience and from so long ago. And
yeah,
we are just like so childish, but in a
yeah.
wonderful way.
And it's beautiful, isn't it? It is. And I don't know whether we'll get into this, but I do think different areas have different kinds of humor. Different, where I grew up, it was very much a mocking kind of humor.
Mm.
Piss taking, if you want to use the sort of like thing. And I remember we'd be all in the pub, the gang, 10 of us or something, and somebody be there from another area, down south or whatever, and they'd say, "Oh my God, do you not like each other?" They go, "What do you mean? You're awful to each other." And you go, "No, that's because we like each other." You couldn't say those things unless you really love somebody.
Well, it's weird, isn't it? Because in my first act, Morris Minor and the Majors, we went and worked all the American clubs for a good few years, and like Catch a Rising Star, Comedy Cellar, and improv and all that. And that whole piss taking thing, the Americans couldn't get a grip of. And I remember we were at a party with me and Tony Hawks, and an American guy comes up to me and goes, "Hey, I just met your mate. He's really great. I really like him. Yeah, what's his? I can't remember his name." I go, "Well, his name's Tony, but we all call him Wanker." And then you could just heard in the distance, "Hey, Wanker!"
And then they'll probably find out what that means and go, why would you say that?
He's your friend.
Yeah, why are you being like this? And I think that kind of closeness of that, you know, I mean, sometimes I despair and I'll say to my friends, let's talk about something else. Because we'll talk about how John once we were all sleeping in a house after a house party and everyone was sleeping everywhere. And he didn't think people could hear. And we used to accuse him. He was kind of a hangdog kind of guy. He didn't have girlfriends, and we used to accuse him of mooching. And mooching when we were kids meant you were just trying to get off with the girl. You were kind of
Oh,
the mooch was the kind of the move, the
yeah,
play.
yeah.
And this house was silent. He must have thought everybody was asleep, but every word carried. And he just went, "Your hair smells lovely. What shampoo do you use?" And from every room in the house, about 15 lads started laughing and go, "John." And do you know what? We calculated the other day, that was 35 years ago. And I don't think a month goes by without us, somebody saying that to him. And he's like, "Oh my God, leave it alone now." So I think those shared experiences are fantastic, aren't they?
I don't know. I don't know why you've just set me off on. We had a friend who used to go swimming and try and pull girls, and his line was, "You're a very good swimmer." So for
That's
years we'd go, "You're a very good
very
swimmer."
good swimmer. It is it that kind of and then I, what I don't love, but what I find fascinating sometimes is you'll be in mixed company with your partners and other friends, and you'll start doing these jokes, and they look at you and just go, "This is pathetic." I
Yeah.
suppose a bit like you and Ainsley, your kids look at you and go, "Grow up."
Well, yeah, but then I think there's a little, I mean, you'll probably find it with your kids. There's a little thing where they kind of like it as well, and
Yeah,
then
you hope so, don't you?
it's a kind of like a warm blanket to them as well. Now,
Yeah,
Ainsley and I do this thing where, like, he always cooks me breakfast and everything, and I'll go, "How much is this for breakfast?" And we'll have like a time when he'll sort of like go, "Well, hold on, we had sausage, we had beans, we had," but everything's always a pound.
yeah.
So but it can last for 10 minutes of like waiting
Yeah,
for a punchline. And we all know where it's going, but it
yeah.
just makes us laugh every time. It's
Ah,
so
that's
weird,
great, isn't
isn't
it?
it?
And you know what? You examine humor on your podcast and you talk about this, but sort of chemically, just hearing you tell that story and enjoying that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Something happens. I don't know what the science is, but something happens, and there's all these things about endorphins, and it releases this and does that. But something, and I think it's more than chemical. I think it's magical. I think it's brain waves.
Or it's psychological, which is why this is called humourology, the cross between humor and psychology. But there's something about, I always say to audiences that if you want anyone to go into any state, you have to go into that state first. And I
Hmm.
think you and watching your stand up is the ultimate in you're having a good time. Yeah,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
and that's I think what the magical experience is that you're in inhabiting somebody else's joy, if that makes sense.
definitely. I when I'm on stage sometimes, and it's great to speak to somebody who knows, who's played the same venues and somewhere like the Comedy Store, which you've been on that stage, and you felt that wrap round, very intense, special place. When I've played there, I feel the ghosts of all you guys who did it, and the posters are still on the wall, and it's like Disneyland, isn't it? It's like it's perfect. It's for comedy. And sometimes, and then I don't want to get too kind of like dramatic about this, but I find myself having this kind of out of body experience and enjoy. And I feel myself, physically turning around and watching myself and enjoying the performance. And then other times I feel like a conductor, on stage when I play the audience are an orchestra, and I need to lift them up a bit there, and I slow that down a bit. And when it's really really cooking, when it's like beyond, uh, you're thinking like a snooker player, 4 or 5 shots ahead. Oh, I need to slow this down a bit here because I need to pull that in there. And if I go too hard on this one, I'm going to lose the impact of that joke. That is 25 years and loving it. And I don't think you can do it if you don't love it.
Well, but also that's I would call unconscious competence, which is right at the top of the tree because you start off, well, we'll get into when you started off, but you start off with conscious incompetence. So you really don't, but then you just start surfing. And that's when the magic happens, is, you don't know consciously what you're doing. It's there. And I always liken it to like a racing driver because as a psychologist I worked with a couple of racing drivers, and I was intrigued that everything is slow, same as footballers. Ask a great footballer. You worked with Eric Cantona, so we'll talk about that. To talk about when they did something, and they'll describe it in slow motion, like the ball came down, and I just bested it, and then I swiveled, and it's like, but that's what. When you're on stage, that's the moment, isn't it, where you're just
Yeah,
everything is.
slows down. The balls look bigger, the jokes look easier. What you're describing there is it's at the beginning of Wayne Rooney's book. He describes the overhead kick he scores against Manchester City like that.
Oh, I
He
haven't read
describes it
that.
exactly like that. Exactly like you're saying that. The ball comes over, I can feel it, but it's silence all around him. And all he knows is he has to make contact. And if he does, he knows he's going to hit it. He knows. And this kind of there was a lot of talk and in comedy, a lot of comedians, everything comes along its all, different cycles of visualization.
Yeah.
And a lot of comedians were visualizing and running through their sets in green rooms and doing all that sort of thing. And I don't think I've ever done that consciously. I think I subconsciously visualize all the time. On the way to a gig, I think about what the gig's going to be like. I imagine what it's like stepping on stage. And sometimes you'll often ask people, and people will ask you when you're being, do you get frightened? Do you still get stage fright? They ask you this all the time. Do you still get stage fright? And you go, there's no such thing as stage fright. Stage fright doesn't exist. It's adrenaline and it's awareness and it's controlling the power. That's what stage fright is. And if I'm ever stood at the side of the stage and I don't feel that, then I start to panic, and then I get stage fright. So I like to imagine, and what I do is I have little techniques like I think, oh, I don't feel like I'm actually ready for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk on stage powerfully, and I'm going to do a big smile. I don't do the same thing every time, but I decide that's what I'm going to do, and I go boom, 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 and then once they're laughing,
That's really interesting because I mean, a lot of our listeners aren't in comedy, but
yeah,
there's so much you can learn from comedy about, everybody at some stage will have to make a speech somewhere or
hmm
stand up in front of an audience. And that whole thing about you just described that perfect foot on stage, big smile. What you're changing, by the way, as soon as you smile, you change your own brain chemistry. So that is now giving you confidence. But on the other hand, the audience looks at you and then it goes, anybody that smiles must be confident. So it
yeah, yeah,
becomes
yeah,
this symbiotic process.
yeah,
And then suddenly you go, oh, this is all right,
yeah,
and you relax, they relax, and suddenly everything. And the problem is that most people don't understand how to reframe that. Everybody, every performer I've ever known who's any good just goes, oh, you've got to have that little thing in your stomach that goes, oh, here we go,
yeah, yeah.
adrenaline.
Yeah, I don't know if is it adrenaline. I don't know. I've always been led to believe it's adrenaline,
Well, it
but
is.
it
It's fight
definitely,
or
yeah,
flight, isn't it? Really, it's. I mean,
definitely, yeah.
it's biological. It's I'm. We talk about as comedians. We always talk about killing or dying, didn't
Yeah,
we?
smashing. Yeah, it's all very vulgar and very. I
Yeah.
think Tony Burgess, a Mancunian stand-up once, he was ill and went to his doctors, and his doctor said, "What do you do for a living?" And he explained, and they said, "How many times a week do you do that?" And they say, I don't know how true this is, but anecdotally, but he said, the amount of adrenaline you use every single night, it needs replenishing, and it's like being in a car crash every single night, and if you don't look after yourself, that goes, and then you can start feeling ill.
Oh God, that's really interesting. We were talking about this with Paul Merton, and he was saying people he went to school with look so old. And we were discussing why, and said, but his theory was they have to do that, get on the train at 7 o'clock in the morning, get to work, clock in, whatever it is. We do it for short bursts,
Exactly. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and I don't know if that can be unhealthy as well, I suppose.
I think it can be unhealthy, and I've thought, as I get a little bit older, and I'm in my mid 50s, and I'm concerned about my health and the future, and how long I want to do this for, because I want to do this forever. I don't ever want to stop, and I don't see there's no reason why I need to stop if I'm healthy and I'm enjoying it. And I think about the looking after yourself. And people say, "Oh, you're on tour. Oh, you must be shattered." And I think, not really, because I have all day to myself. Somebody drives me there, and they point me onto the stage, and people love me, and I get all that. And because nowadays, well, for 10 years now, I don't drink. So after the show, there's no escape valve. I don't have to do any of that sort of thing. So I kind of quite live in a healthier, kind of more calm life than a lot of people can do. I mean, drinking isn't the same culture now in comedy, but that kind of short burst of work, and then I sleep well. I sleep if I don't do a gig, I don't know what to do with myself.
Oh, really? You need to get that energy
Yeah,
out.
I mean, especially at the weekends. If I'm not on stage on a Thursday, Friday, or a Saturday, it's just it's that old Glenn Miller thing. The marching through the snow. You know that story, don't you? It's Christmas
Well,
Eve, and
tell our audience the story.
the Glenn Miller band are on a coach trip somewhere in the Midwest or wherever it is, and it's Christmas Eve and it's a snowy, blustery night, and the bus breaks down. And they have to march across some fields because they've got to go and do the gig, and they come across a cottage and they peer in, and there's a roaring log fire, and there's a family all sat round the tree waiting for Santa. And one says to the other, goes, "How do these people live their lives like this? These people." It's like, you know,
But it's kind of true because you become a bit of an addict to it. I mean, I speak at corporate audiences now, which I always say it's so much easier than the Comedy Store at 1:45 in the morning,
Hmm.
on a Friday night. But the adrenaline's still there, the same. And
And the stakes are higher, Paul.
well, are they higher? Because I think
The
the comedy,
personal stakes are higher, not what you care about, but the
yeah,
kind of
maybe.
like I need to, because a bad corporate gig will set you back a lot further than a bad 5 minutes at the comedy store, won't it?
Yeah, but I think it's harder to do a bad corporate gig because I don't think the expectations are so when we started, we did the opening night of the Comedy Store, funnily enough. When the
Amazing.
new one, we went from
What
Leicester.
a lovely thing. I mean, that's the sort of thing I'm saying when I walk into any shop. Like, I'll have a latte, please. And by the way, I did the opening night at the comedy store. What a thing to have. I mean, that's just a great thing to have. I am not regret. I wish I'd been around in your days because I think it was a little bit more innovative and exciting and different and varied than it probably is now.
Well, I just think it's different. And by the way, there were so few of us. That was like the whole thing. It was you did know literally everyone, but then you would get the odd acts, like Chris Luby, who would do noises of aeroplanes.
Yeah. There's a li- I did there's a little bit of that crossover from me. I worked with and I forgot his name and he put the firework up his bum. Um,
I know exactly who you mean because he was in the Greatest Show on Legs as well.
yeah,
Was
and
he as well?
one of the first pictures I saw was Martin Stone as well from the Great
Yeah,
Show on
Martin.
Legs
Yeah.
at the because I used to go to the Buzz, which I don't know whether you ever did in South Manchester. And the Buzz was kind of like it was Agraman, and this club was so old it used to be called it was comedy and cabaret because that's what you were all in alternative
Yeah.
cabaret
Oh
at the
no.
time,
Yeah,
weren't you?
it was called Alternative Cabaret. Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to watch him, and he would come on with I think he came on with like rubber bands on his face, and he had this book that he opened and it lit up, and he'd go, "Oh, bloody good book," and just little prop acts and things like that. I saw some of the just I was luckily saw some of these guys, and I loved all that.
Was it
I
Chris
lo
something? Chris something who was
Lynham,
Lynham, that's it.
yeah, Chris Lynham, and I hosted him once at the in Manchester, and I joined him in his finale.
With the firework.
Yeah, yeah. And he presents him. Nobody has ever seen him. He presents as this absolute wild-eyed. He looks a bit like a caveman caught in the modern world, doesn't he? With his
Yeah, yeah.
mad hair and his kind of, and he was like he would talk to the audience. He was sort of like down to his pants would be around his ankles, and he would, you know, he would appear to shove a firework up his arse and light it. But actually, as he was setting me up, he gave me a smaller one as well. Which, when I think about it, actually a bigger one would have been better further away. But he gave me, but as he said it, he goes, just hold it between your legs. And he was all that whispering instructions. He said, hold it between your legs, don't move. And then you just stand there. It's such a great thing to do.
Has it become the circuit become more generic in that sense of that because more people doing the same thing, or is it just
It's
me?
yeah, joke telling, more storytelling, joke telling
Yeah.
and then there are kind of like little spin-off circuits of different things of people doing alternative stuff to the alternative and the kind of that sort of thing. And there are a few great character acts coming through now and that sort of thing, which I think is good. I think the world doesn't need a load of middle-aged white men telling them they don't like their wives in a variety of different ways.
Uh, But you didn't come into comedy till you were like 29,
Yeah,
did
29,
you?
yeah.
And you were a salesman before that.
Hmm.
Anything that you learned in sales that became useful in comedy?
Um, how roads directions
Oh, so you're
what
traveling.
was I mean literally having a company car when I first started out and a mobile phone in those days was very useful. um didn't, that was kind of a novel thing. And I had a little time of crossover between the one and the other. But I think what I'd learned was about maybe presentation, maybe turning up on time. This still kind of fascinates me that, especially when we do corporate work and you know how important that is for the kind of, year end kind of when you add everything up. How many comedians at my level, good comics, and you'd say half intelligent people, because I don't think you can be really thick and do comedy,
No,
especially at a corporate level, um, will turn up and I'll say I always ask the organizer, oh, who did it last year? And very often they'll say Harry Hill, and I'll say, oh, the budget's gone down this year, and they'll go, yes, it has. Or if they say somebody at my level, and I just casually say, and how was it for them? Um, and they'll never say, oh, they were rubbish or they were brilliant. They'll just tell you how they were. And it's surprising how often they say they were a bit rude. They were
uh,
a bit made it all about them. And some people I think in our game think you have to be like that to get on because they've seen that behavior from other people. And I just think for me it's a no-brainer. Turn up, smile on time, polish your shoes, do your jokes. If they tell you not to say that, don't say it in a corporate environment. You're not
no,
pushing boundaries there.
no, I completely agree. But isn't it like anything? So that is what you learn from sales is actually give the audience what they want.
Hmm.
And what not what you think they should have.
But then in stand up, you then that's the other when you're just doing pure comedy and stand up, you are giving the audience what you think they should have. You can, and I'm not a political comedian or very, but I do think I talk about some very big subjects
Mm.
under the guise of the cheeky northern chappy. I think you can get messages out there. And I talk in stand up about men's mental health and having some therapy and some big things that if I was straight out of footlights, people would go, oh, this guy is talking about some really big issues, you know. But because it comes out with a lighter touch,
Well,
I think it has an impact.
well, you touched on mental health and you touched on therapy, and I know you're interested in, and you were very open relatively recently about your ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah,
And I think, I mean, how do you think comedy can actually be part of that therapy?
I don't know. I know without comedy, I'd be a mess
Oh,
professionally, personally, relationships wise. I need comedy is my outlet to do, it's my social life and my work at the same time, which some people might think is a dangerous thing, but I don't. I actually think it's great. I love it. I love going to work. I love hanging out with comedians. I love telling jokes. I love getting in the car and coming home as well. I love listening to audiobooks on the way home and I love every aspect of comedy. I love it. But I think if I hadn't found comedy at 29 when I did, I think with the kind of I still would have had the same ups and downs that I've had in my life, and I don't think I'd have been able to cope with it the same. So I think comedy does help me. And the ADHD thing is a relatively new realization, but actually I probably always knew that I operated differently. But I think everybody is different. I think this phrase neurodivergent, show me somebody who's neurotypical because I can't think of anybody who's neurotypical.
that's why it's called a spectrum, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you've got to be somewhere on it, haven't you?
Some people are, who have real problems with their life are at the outside edges and can impact their life. And I'm relatively lucky. It's just caused me bumps in the road, I think, and little hurdles that I think I've coped and masked and doing and all those things that people say. The only sad thing is, Paul, and it's two sides of the coin on this, is that on one side of it, I now realize that I didn't do well at school because I never learned how to learn. And that kind of upsets me a little bit because I pay great, store in education and learning and knowledge and I love that sort of thing. But on the other side of the coin, if I knew I'd had ADHD and I'd gone down a different path and I'd perhaps gone to, I probably wouldn't be doing this now. And out of both of those, would I rather have a career in comedy or in A levels? I think I'd rather have a career in comedy.
100%. But it's also very interesting that you, I don't think there's really such a thing as a learning difficulty. I think there's a teaching difficulty. And I don't know
Hmm.
about you, Ainsley and I went to a school with 2,100 boys, a big
Yeah,
comprehensive, and there are 12 classes in each year with 34, 35 people in each
yeah,
class. I was quite lucky because the top two classes were grammar streams, so at least there were, but it was still mayhem.
yeah.
And and you just either get lucky with being put somewhere where you can actually learn, or people spotting that you learn in a different way.
Hmm.
You are in what I would call incredibly auditory. So I mean, just as a psychologist listening, and obviously you do comedy, but also you like your audio books and you like those kind of. If somebody had taught you in a way, you could have easily, got degrees and masters and everything because you would have known how to do it. And
Hmm.
to me, your ADHD is a gift in
Mm,
in many senses, you know.
definitely. Yeah, and I don't take that for granted. I enjoy that, and I revel in it. What the only thing that upsets me about it is, and it does upset me a little bit, is that I knew that when I was a kid, when I was 8, 9, and 10, I was sailing through a primary school, not a care in the world, top marks. I don't know if you remember, there was a thing called the Edinburgh Reading Test, and it was this kind of mark that kids had at primary school.
Yeah.
And by the time I was 9 and 10, I was reading adult books. I was just reading, free reading, right from an early age, and I devoured books. I lived in the library. I read reference, but I just read. I just loved books. And then when I got to 11, and you went to the high school or the secondary school, whatever, the next level, and you had to have your bag ready for maths at the first period, and then you had to get to geography, and then you had to go. And then we were on a school with like three sites, and I just couldn't. And I just kind of just ended up getting away with it rather than just doing it. I found it easier to get away with it than do it. And actually, looking back now, it would have been easier just to do done the work. You
Well,
know,
yeah, but that's all about, what you learnt was a coping mechanism to do what you had to do to an extent, but it
to
just didn't
survive.
kick in to survive, and it just didn't kick in for the learning. But also the idea that we're all mature at the same age to be able to
Mm,
do these things is a complete anathema. Yeah, we're not all
yeah.
that. We all grow
No.
up at different ages,
Yeah.
obviously that some of us never grow up, which is a joy. No, I'm saying it as a good thing.
And the only thing about all that is that I was miserable for a long period in my teens because I felt unfulfilled and frustrated, and that carried on until I was 29. From the age of like 12 until 29, I was I was like, what am I doing? Why am I not doing this? I mean, I'm better than this. This is the kind of feeling I had. And
Was it true that you were homeless at one stage?
yeah, I was for about 2 or 3 years. I was kind of, I wasn't, I need to clarify this because I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. I wasn't rough sleeping. I lived in a car at one point. I lived in a car. I wasn't rough sleeping. I lived in an abandoned caravan on a junkyard. So it kind of was, yeah, no
Yeah,
electricity or
that's
running
pretty
water,
rough.
and I was sofa surfing, but I maintained friendship groups and circles of friends, and I was kind of young enough that I was still kind of Jack the lad, and I'd still hang out at mates' houses for a bit, and I'd do a bit of work here, and I'd end up, working in a hotel, so I could just hang out in the hotel for a bit, and I kind of did all that, yeah, and I look back at that period. I think, oh, I was probably two or three wrong decisions away from going down a worse path than I did in the end. And in the end, I met somebody, and we moved in together, and that sort of kind of saved me.
That saved you, but did humor save you as well, basically? Because I'm listening to you, and you said I still had mates and I still think so you were getting some perspective on your life and what humor, if you think about it, gives you is a way to stand aside and look at things in a funny way. Were
Definitely.
you were you always able to do that about yourself? Because you said I was a bit miserable, but then you would step to mates and would you joke
Yeah.
about your
No,
circumstances?
no, nobody knew I was miserable. Well, they did actually, and still my pals remember the time where they fondly call it where I lived, Cortina Avenue, when I was sleeping in this car on the side street. When I lived on Cortina, and my mate was on 6-2 shifts. He worked in the mill, and because I was kind of embarrassed about sleeping in the car, I was like 18, 19. I was embarrassed about it. He would come and knock me awake at 5:45. So I would get out of the car before other people, there's people going on their way to school. I didn't want people to see me. And then I would walk around a bit and kind of like, just not do anything. And then whoever had said, "Oh, come to mine this morning for a shower," or, great friends that I look back on at the time, John and Jackie, and these people who would wash my clothes for me and let me have a shower and sometimes have a snooze on their sofa while their parents were at work. But you know what? And I did use humor there because every one of those parents at the time knew what I was up to. And I know that if one of my kids' friends was like, I'd be a bit, well, what's he doing? But because I was charming and I was humorous and I was funny, I got away with it. I got away with more than I should have got. I was very lucky that I had a sense of humor about it.
I think that part of the reason for that is, and you touched on it earlier, that you've never met a stupid comedian because you have to be very intelligent to make those connections. And they probably actually just recognized that he's going through this phase, but with that brain, with that attitude, with that humor, he can come out the other end.
Yeah, hopefully. And I'm still friends with all those people now. And
That's
I'm still grateful to all those people now and able to not treat them because that sounds like I'm some kind of benevolent kind of god. But I'm still they can join in some of the nice things that happen in my life, the things that I get to experience. Things like you and I would probably take for granted, going to a radio recording like we've been to together. It's these things that not people are, to go backstage to things and they've met friends of mine that, and that sort of thing. So I think it's very important.
well, yeah, it sort of takes me on to you've built a life where you've spent it around successful people. And
Hmm.
one of my heroes as well, who you got to work with, Eric Cantona,
Yeah.
in the film. What do you think, that special sauce that make successful people successful? And is humor important in that mix?
Yeah, definitely. I've met some impressive people in my life, and I think Eric Cantona, Chris Hoy, who I spent some time with and worked with a little bit, are two examples. Peter Kay, for different reasons, he's kind of like and they all have this. I don't want to say genius because that's too easy a word to use, but they have an aura, a different um, thing around them. And with Peter, it's obviously comedy, sense of humor, and he's very kind of that way. Um, I mean, we all know the funniest comedians are not always the funniest ones on stage. They're the funniest ones in the green room.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying he's the funniest comedian I've ever met. There are far funnier than him in real life. Um, but I think Eric Cantona, if this is who we're talking about, had a kind of like everything he said that sounds ridiculous to most people, we can take with the pinch of salt, tongue in cheek. Or some people might think, they put it on t-shirts, the seagulls follow the trailer. I think all those times, I think he's taking the piss. I don't think he's ever been serious. I think he's taking the piss. And you see his commercials now for the beer. He lampoons the Eric Cantona, and I think he kind of understands that. In very similar ways, I was growing up. I was a big fan of the Smiths, and most people who are a fan of the Smiths, their impression of them is dour, miserable, defeated stuff. but I find joy. It's comedy. This, I
Gladiola.
see I see a direct correlation between the lyrics of Morrissey and the words like Tony Warren would write for early Coronation Street, and then take that right back to Norman Evans over the wall. That kind of, and the
Yeah,
Les Dawson, the kind of
yeah.
Sissy and Ada thing. And I can, there's a line there to Morrissey. There is a line there. There definitely is. So I think all these very impressive people that you meet have a self-awareness, which is about sense of humor, isn't it? Like, if you can laugh at yourself, you need to be able to not take yourself seriously.
Well, I think that's really true, and I'd like to dig down a little bit. I mean, how important is that to not, well, A, because you don't want to become Billy Big Bollocks, do you? So,
Hmm.
and you've talked about choosing your friends who will take you down a peg or two,
Oh, of
as
course. Yeah.
and that's their job. And the reason why they're there is so you can't get, oh, look, look at you working with Eric Cantona. And if you took that seriously and went, like you said, going to Starbucks and go, did you know that I worked with Eric Cantona?
Yeah, do you know who I am? Is
Yeah.
the thing. I think that's, I still like, I got Sam, who I'm working with, he's tour managing now, and we're just getting to know each other. And that it's a lovely little, when you start to work with somebody and you get on with them, and I get on with him really well, and we're swapping stories. And then I was conscious the other day that all my stories involved. And then I said to Elton John, and it was, and I just, but I still, I think because of my background and because of my family and because of my friends that I have now, they're not really comedy. They'll just go, "Come on, mate, shut up, what?"
Well, literally yesterday, Ainsley and I had this story about you have to edit yourself sometimes because some of our stories are ridiculous, as are yours. You
Yeah,
know, we were produced by John Deacon of Queen. So I was going, I started to say that in a pub down the road, and I went, oh, fucking hell, but that was your life. You went, we used to hang around with Queen. It was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
this is mental already. But
yeah,
you're with your mates who's been through something like that, or you and I can do that, with the stuff. You can do it, but you have to be very careful where you do it.
yeah, yeah. My mates, when they met John Bishop for the first time, just as he was getting famous, um, they went, I said, "Oh, this is John." And my mate says, "Oh, I know who he is." So he went, "What?" I said, "I know, yeah." He said, "You missed a penalty against Buxton for Hyde United." Because he used to play semi-pro, and that was our local team. And he goes, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "My dad had a heart attack that day." So he kind of played John for that.
No, but do you know? I mean, did you are quite recognizable now? How does because some people, obviously, Ainsley does it really well. Just, is very relaxed with the whole thing and just,
Mhm.
everybody saying hello and everything like that. Are you the same way, or do you have?
Yeah, nobody bothers me because I'm at a lovely level where there's not that many people know who I am. And, I do get a little bit, oh, yeah, yeah. And I get a lot of people going, do I know you? And I struggled for years to go, well, you might have seen me on. And,
That's
and,
right.
and so now the answer is I just go, yeah, I'm a comedian. And they go, that's it. I just
Yeah.
say I'm a comedian. It just covers all bases. And then one that Catherine, my other half, told me with a little trick that she'd heard somebody famous. I think it might be somebody like Judy Dench or somebody says when you meet somebody, you never say nice to meet you. You always say how lovely to see you.
Oh,
Because the number of times you say nice to meet you, and they go, I met you in 2003 backstage
God,
at
yeah,
the
that's good.
Frog and Bucket, and I go, mate, you want to say I meet hundreds of people and I just forgot. You remember because you like Phoenix Nights and you met young Kenny that day. That's why you remember. But then you don't want to be the arsehole. So you always say, "Oh, it's really nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you. Very nice
Nice
to
to
see you,
see
sir.
you. Nice
Very
to
nice
see
to
you.
see. How nice to see you."
Yeah, no, 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 that's lovely, and it's so warm.
I had. Do you remember John Pigeon? He's at BBC Radio Comedy. I think he might have passed away now. He
Vaguely,
was there.
yeah.
Yeah, so I Edinburgh, something like 2002. And I said, "Hi, my name's Justin." You are? And he went, for the third time this festival, John Pidgey from BBC Radio Comedy. And I went, sorry, mate.
No.
Because I forget people's names. I remember everybody's faces, but I forget their names.
I'm going to interject here because we had so much fun with Justin that this is the end of part 1, but we're going to do a part 2 very soon. The Humourology podcast was hosted by Paul Barros, produced by David Rose, music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.